The settlement of Brown Reach smelled like brine and burnt fuel, the way all coastal towns do when the ocean is trying to reclaim what the colonists dragged out of it. Les Mackerel stood on the front porch of his fibro house and watched the sun go down the way a man watches something he isn't sure he'll see again. He had a beer in one hand he wasn't drinking, and a cigarette in the other he was. Quentin, his adopted boy, was inside watching something loud on television. A normal Tuesday, except for the fact that Les hadn't slept in 4 days. He'd been having the dream again, the sky on fire, the towers of Horizon's End City crumbling like wet paper. His brother's face in the smoke, not screaming, just watching, satisfied, the way Norton always looked when things went wrong for other people. Les took a long drag and exhaled slow. He'd promised Quentin normal, he'd promised himself, and he'd almost managed it. 18 months since the island, since the Chumas, since the blood. 18 months of school runs and council rates and arguments about the lawn, and somewhere in that stretch of grinding mundane he'd started to believe it was real. That Brown Reach was just a town, that he was just a bloke. Sassy knocked on the gate rather than opening it, which meant it was serious. The big Sasquatch only knocked when he had something he didn't want to say standing up. "Mate," Sassy said. "Don't," Les said. "The scouts found another one, down near the estuary, third this week." Les dropped the cigarette and put his heel on it. He looked at the door, through which he could hear Quentin laughing at something on the TV. That laugh. He kept that laugh in a specific pocket of himself, the one he checked when things got bad. How big? Big enough. Clarence says the spore signature matches the hive. Clarence, Les said the name like a curse. Why is Clarence involved? Because, Sassy said, leaning on the gatepost, Clarence made them, mate. And whatever's growing down by the estuary didn't crawl out of the ocean on its own. The first Chuma specimen had washed up 6 weeks prior. A fisherman had brought it in, thinking it was a diseased seal, and the resulting scene at the Brown Reach Marine Facility had cost 3 paramedics their composure and 1 marine biologist her lunch. By the time Les heard about it, the facility had been quietly quarantined, and the fisherman relocated to a cousin's property in the interior. Les had known then. He just hadn't admitted it. The thing about the Chumas, and Les had thought about this more than any human being should be required to think about alien biology, was that they weren't just dangerous, they were patient. The hive thought across years, sent scouts, mapped coastlines, established footholds in the dark and wet places. By the time you found one, there were already hundreds you hadn't. Donnie was waiting at the corner store when they got there, leaning against the roller door with his arms folded, wearing his good flannel because he always wore his good flannel when things were going to hell. Mike Nolan was inside on his 3rd coffee, pretending to read a newspaper. "Oh, so," Mike said without looking up. "We're going back." "Nobody's going anywhere," Les said. "Mate." "I said nobody's going anywhere." Les poured himself a coffee. His hands were steady. He was proud of that. "We've got a location. We've got time. We handle this like professionals. We don't need to go back there," Donnie said. "Les." "What?" "Clarence says it's not just scouts." Silence. The coffee machine gurgled. Outside, a gull hit the power line and dropped and flew away. "He says they're building something," Donnie continued. "In the estuary, underground. He says if it connects to whatever's under the shelf offshore. He's guessing," Les said. "Clarence is always guessing. Half his theories are guesses dressed up in big words." "He says it with confidence," Sassy offered. "Sassy, that means nothing. He says everything with confidence. He's got potato for a head, and he still looks you in the eye and tells you you're wrong." Clarence Claymore appeared in the doorway at that precise moment, as though he'd been waiting for his name. He was small and wide, and shaped approximately like a garden tool someone had left in the rain too long. His head, and this required saying even among people who'd known him years, was genuinely shaped like a potato. Not metaphorically, not approximately. A potato, sitting on shoulders, looking at you with eyes that suggested a deeply unfair intelligence was trapped in there. To get out. "I'm not guessing," Clarence said. "Get out of my door." "You didn't let me finish in the briefing." There was no briefing. "We were having a coffee." Les. Clarence stepped inside with the precise confidence of a man who has been thrown out of better establishments than this. "I know these things. I made these things. And I am telling you, with full professional certainty, as someone who spent 32 years as a research scientist on Horizon's End before certain events transpired, that what is in that estuary is a secondary node, which means the primary node is elsewhere, which means the island." Les looked at his coffee. He looked at Sassy. He looked at the door. He looked at Donnie, who gave him the small nod that meant, "Yeah, we both know he's right." How long? Les said finally. 6 weeks, maybe 8. Before the secondary node matures and begins producing queens. And if queens reach the mainland. Clarence's potato face did something uncomfortable. Then Brown Reach is not a problem you solve. It's a problem you evacuate. The plan took 3 days to build, and about 9 hours to start falling apart. They ran the briefing at the back of Donnie's garage, which smelled like sump oil and years of decisions made in proximity to a bong, with a whiteboard that still had Tuesday footy tipping written down one side. Les stood at the front. The others, Donnie, Sassy, Mike, Clarence, and Sergio Warrington, who had nowhere else to be, sat on a collection of chairs that had no business being in the same room as each other. When we land on that island, Les said, and we will land on that island, it is going to be exactly like last time, except for all the ways it will be worse. More chumas, better organized, possibly the big ones. He looked around the room. Nobody looked enthusiastic. There's something I need you to hold on to when it gets bad out there. When you're in the bush, and the things are coming, and your brain is telling you to sit down and stop. I need you to find something inside you that you hate. Something that makes your blood go hot. For me it's Norton, for you it'll be different. But find it, and when you need to move, use it. That's the fuel. That's how we get through. Mike raised his hand. Norton's dead, mate. The feeling isn't. Fair enough. Sassy nodded slowly. Deep philosophy, I respect it. It's not philosophy, Sass, it's tactics. Sure. Still respect it. The boat they took was Clarence's. A small fiberglass tinny with an outboard that sounded like a man arguing with himself in an enclosed space. Les sat at the bow watching the horizon. Behind him, Donnie was on his 3rd cigarette of the journey. Sassy was eating something from a bag he wouldn't identify. Mike had his kit on his lap and was methodically checking things that didn't need checking. Sergio was sleeping. Clarence was explaining the secondary node theory again to no one in particular. The island appeared at dawn as a dark line against orange water, the same way it always had, the same way it probably had since before any of them existed. Low and flat at the edges, rising to a central mass of jungle, through which something had clearly been growing, because the tree line was wrong. It jutted and pushed in ways that vegetation alone didn't explain. That's new, Donnie said. Hive architecture, Clarence said. They build vertically when they're establishing a new hub. The root system goes down first then. Don't need the biology, Les said. Need a landing spot. They came in on the north shore, where the sand was pale and the water ran shallow over rocks. Les was first out of the boat, knee-deep and cold, shotgun up, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved. The birds were wrong. Too few, wrong species, calling in short bursts that didn't string together the way birds should. Les had learned to read that. The chumas didn't eat birds, but they disrupted them. Their presence changed the ambient noise of a place the way a bruise changed the color of skin. Peripheral, persistent, wrong. They made camp in a collapsed concrete structure 200 meters from shore. The ruins of whatever Brown Reach Fishing Co. had left when they pulled out in 2009. The walls were solid. One exit. Cover overhead. What are we calling this? Mike asked, setting up the small stove. Operation End It, Donnie said. That's not very creative. It's descriptive, could be both. Les said nothing. He was looking at the jungle, where the light was doing things it shouldn't. Deep in there, something large was moving. Not fast, not alarmed. Moving the way a thing moves when it's never had a reason to fear anything. It was Sassy who handed Les the joint before he went out alone that night. Did it without ceremony, just held it out with 2 fingers while staring at the fire, and said, "If you get lost out there, use this. But be ready for what it shows you." Les almost said no. He was about to say no. Then he thought about Norton, which he'd been trying not to do, and the dream which he couldn't stop, and the look Quentin had given him when he left. Not upset, just watching him go with those patient eyes, knowing something Les hadn't said out loud. He took the joint, pocketed it, went into the dark. The chuma found him 40 minutes in near a stream that ran black in the moonlight. It came from his right, fast and low, all stinger and intention, and Les caught it across the face with the stock of the shotgun and shot it twice before it could recover. The noise was enormous and wrong in the jungle quiet. He stood over the body, breathing hard, waiting for the wave, more of them, responding to the noise. Nothing came. He was about to move when it spoke. Mackerel. The voice came from his left, from a second one he hadn't seen. It was huge, the biggest he'd ever encountered, settled against a boulder like it had been there for hours. "You came back." "You know me," Les said. It wasn't a question. "The hive knows everything that crosses onto the island. We've been expecting you." The creature shifted, and the moonlight caught it. Enormous, scarred, with that wrong bilateral symmetry that alien biology always threw at you if you looked closely enough. My name is Brutus, Bumble Brutus. I've been here a long time. Les kept the shotgun level. Say your piece. Kingdom Come is gone, Brutus said. Not just damaged. Gone. We saw it happen. The words landed and didn't quite land, the way big things don't when you're not ready for them. Les had known this. Had known it since the second year of exile, when the stars had changed and the signals stopped coming. But knowing something and being told it by the thing that was supposed to be your enemy were two different weights in your chest. 6 of you survived, Brutus said. Prince Leslie, his brother, the scientist, and 3 others. We have been tracking you all since the crash landing that created us. You were made in a crash, Les said. Doesn't mean you know anything about me. No, Brutus agreed. But we know what your father did. We know why the city fell. We know, Prince, that the war you think you're fighting here is not the one that will matter. Les shot him 3 times. He stood there after, in the ringing silence. And the second Chuma he hadn't killed turned and looked at him from 20 meters away. A juvenile, small, with that orange banding on the stinger that meant newly emerged. It shrieked once and bolted. Les watched it go. He smoked the joint walking back through the jungle. The vision came on gradually, not the explosive wrongness he'd expected, but a softening of edges, a color change in the periphery, until the trees became something else, geometric and flat, and the stars above were too bright and too many, and Sassy was standing in a clearing that shouldn't exist. No bong, no flannel, just Sassy looking at him with the serious face he rarely used. You've been running toward this for 18 months, Sassy said, but you've been running away from the real thing for longer than that. Tell me something useful, Les said. The universe is a system. What you put into it comes back around. Every act of generosity, every act of cruelty. You've been metering out the cruelty for years, mate, and you've been calling it justice. My brother sold Horizon's End to our father 100,000 people. Yes, that's not cruelty. That's debt. Sassy looked at him for a long time. The flat geometry of the vision pulsed and settled. You're going to find him tonight. He built a ship same as you. He came here same as you. You're going to corner him. And you're going to have a choice. He paused. What you do with Norton says something about who you are, not just who he was. I know who he is. Pless. The serious face, rare and heavy. Once you open that door, there is no closing it. You understand? I'm not saying don't. I'm saying know why. Les woke up near the camp perimeter, sitting against a tree with the shotgun still in his hands. The sky was lightening. From inside the camp, he could hear Mike Nolan doing something with the stove, clanging things in the particular way. Mike clanged things when he was too tired to be careful. He found Norton just before sunrise. His brother was on the eastern cliff, the one that dropped 60 meters straight to rocks and surf, where the island's edge had been sheared clean by whatever geological violence had made the place. He'd built a ship just like Les had. Different design, sleeker, better materials, obviously more planning, and it sat in a cleared section of jungle, just back from the cliff edge, covered in a tarp that had seen better days. Norton himself stood at the edge, hands in pockets, watching the dark line where the ocean met the sky. He heard Les coming. He always had. You fixed yours, Norton said. You built yours, Les said. I had more time. You spent your first 3 years in Brown Reach being angry at trees. 2 years. 3. Les raised the shotgun. Norton didn't move. He turned slowly, without urgency, and looked at the gun the way he looked at everything, like it was a minor complication in an ongoing plan. I've been waiting for this conversation, Norton said. It's not a conversation. Everything is a conversation, Leslie. You didn't come up here just to shoot me. If you wanted to shoot me, you'd have done it in the dark, and I'd be on those rocks already. Les kept the gun up. His hands were steady. Still proud of that. Norton looked older than Les remembered. Not beaten. Norton never looked beaten, but worn the way a tool looks after a long job. There was a scar along his jaw he hadn't had before. His eyes were the same, though. That cool, distant appraisal, like every conversation was happening slightly below him. Father destroyed Horizon's End, Les said. You knew. Not until after. Liar. I knew he was coming. I didn't know what he was bringing with him. There's a difference, Leslie, between being complicit and being outmaneuvered. Tell me the difference. Really explain it to me, because from where I'm standing they look the same from the outside. Norton was quiet. Something moved in the jungle behind them. Big. Not Chuma, probably the island's wind patterns, doing something to the canopy. Norton glanced back and looked at Les again. I came here, he said, to destroy the hive. Same as you. Father set this in motion. The Chumas were his insurance policy. Anything he couldn't control, couldn't recruit, couldn't leverage. He seeded the island from orbit. That's what Bumble Brutus was telling you. The hive doesn't belong to us or to itself, it belongs to him. Les lowered the shotgun. Not much. Enough. Then who's the enemy? Les said. You know who the enemy is. Norton smiled, and it was almost, not quite, but almost, the smile Les remembered from before everything. The one from when they were young and stupid, and standing on the rooftops of Horizon's End on warm nights, watching the city below them, thinking they'd inherited something worth having. Father. It's always been father. Everything else is just weather. Les shot him in the stomach, not the kill shot. He'd had it lined up, between the eyes, like he'd been planning for 18 months, like he'd rehearsed in the bad dreams. He didn't take it. He put the bullet in Norton's abdomen instead. And Norton went to his knees at the cliff edge and looked up at him, with an expression that moved through several things, before settling on something that wasn't quite surprise. You had the shot, Norton said. I know why. Les stood there. The sun was clearing the horizon now, laying a long orange road across the black water. Down at the camp he could hear the fight starting. Shotguns. Something heavier. Donnie's voice cutting above the noise. They needed him. Norton's hand went to his jacket. Fast trained, the kind of fast that wasn't improvised. He had a blade out in less than a second. Les shot him 3 more times. Norton looked at the gun, looked at Les. His last words, delivered with the specific flat conviction of a man who'd won his argument, were, "Fuck you." Les shot him once more, between the eyes. He stood there for a moment, watching the sun come all the way up, that long light reaching across the water and hitting the cliff face and the still shape at his feet. He thought about what Sassy had said. He thought about whether the thing he felt was justice or cruelty or grief or some fourth thing that didn't have a clean name. He kicked Norton's body off the cliff. Then he turned and ran toward the sound of the guns. The camp was a war by the time he arrived. Chumas from 3 directions. Eastern jungle, the beach approach, and something through the concrete ceiling that had punched a hole you could fit a car through. Donnie was in the corner with a blunderbuss, and the kind of focus that only happens when there's nothing left to worry about. Sassy had somehow triggered the camp stove in a way that created a fireball through the eastern breach, which had slowed the beach wave considerably. Sergio was on a folding chair with a pistol, and the calm expression of a man who'd made peace with the situation some time ago. Mike Nolan was on the roof. How or why Mike was on the roof, Les couldn't immediately determine, but he had a rifle, and he was using it with the mechanical efficiency of a man who'd been practicing in a backyard he'd never told anyone about. "Knowlesy," Les called up. "Mate, bit busy," a shot, then another. "They've got something big coming from the north tree line." Clarence appeared from behind a collapsed wall covered in gray dust, holding a device that looked like a thermos someone had tried to improve. His potato face was, if this was possible, more serious than usual. "The secondary node," he said. "Now," Les said. "It's now or we don't get another window. The hive is bringing everything it has to this fight because it wants us dead before we reach the primary. If we run now while they're committed to this engagement." He held up the device. "I can get to the pit, the main entrance. I know where it is from the spore trail. If I drop this in, it'll chain react through the root system. The whole island." Les looked at him. Clarence looked back. "You built those things," Les said. "Yes, your formula. Your accident. Yes, not defensive, just honest. And now you want to drop your life's work into a pit." Clarence looked at the device. Something crossed his face. A geologist's grief. A scientist's mourning, the recognition of what a thing cost and what burying it would buy. He exhaled. "Oh well, it's only my life's work." Les gripped his shoulder once and let go. "How long do you need?" 20 minutes, maybe 25. The pit is north of here, past where Brutus was. If you can hold them off, we'll hold them off." Les looked at Donnie, at Sassy, at Mike on the roof, and Sergio in his chair. He looked at these people who had no reason to be here except that they were, and had been, and would be until the last one of them stopped breathing. "We'll hold them off." Clarence ran. The next 20 minutes belonged to a specific category of time that Les had learned about on Chuma Island the first time, and had been hoping never to encounter again. The kind where every second is both too long and too short, where the decisions you make are made in the dark and at speed, and you only find out later whether they were right. They fell back to the inner room. They stacked the entrances with every improvised thing they had. Equipment bags, the folding table, a generator that weighed more than it had any right to. The Chumas came in waves with that particular rhythm they had, the one that Clarence said was coordinated by the primary node. Probe, Withdraw, harder probe, then everything. The third wave hit the ceiling breach at the same time as the western wall. Donnie caught the western wave, with the blunderbuss and a cache of homemade charges that he'd been carrying in his jacket, with the specific serenity of a man who trusts his own manufacturing. The ceiling breach was worse. Les put 2 down with the shotgun and a third with his knife when it came close enough, and Sassy, big, immovable Sassy, simply caught one across the face with a camp table and hit it so hard it departed the building via the southern wall. Mike fell through the ceiling hole, landed on a chuma, somehow survived, looked up at Les with dust on his face and said, "Mate, I am absolutely cooked." "Join the queue," Les said, and helped him up. The ground shook at minute 18, then again harder at minute 22. Then a sound came up through the soil that wasn't an explosion, and wasn't quite an earthquake. More like something enormous deflating, a pressure releasing from down, that the surface only registered it as a shudder, and a long, deep groan that traveled through the rock under their boots and up into their bones. The chumas stopped, every single one of them at once, mid-movement, mid-charge, like a switch had been thrown in something central. They stood in the broken camp in the early morning light, and the chumas stood in all the ways they'd been moving and became still, and then they made a sound, high, collective, wrong, and began to retreat, into the jungle, back toward the center of the island. Away Les stood in the silence and watched them go. Sassy put a hand on his shoulder and didn't say anything, which was the most Sassy thing possible. Clarence came back 27 minutes after he left, from the north, covered in soil, and something that smelled like copper and old chemicals. He was limping. His left arm wasn't moving right. He looked at Les with his potato face doing the thing it did when he was trying not to show something, and held up one hand and it was empty. "It's done," he said. Les looked at him for a long time. He thought about all the times he'd told Clarence to get out of the way, to shut up, to stop with the theories, to take his potato head and his accidental apocalypse and remove himself from situations. He thought about the fact that Clarence, who had accidentally created the worst biological catastrophe in the last 50 years, had just walked into the heart of that catastrophe and ended it. He opened his mouth to say something gracious. What he said was, "You're still not borrowing the boat." Clarence stared at him. He said, "The boat's blown up, mate. He's still not borrowing it." Clarence smiled. "Just a small one, the reluctant kind, the kind that arrives against a person's better judgment." He sat down heavily on a piece of broken wall and said, "Oh, hoovin' schmoovin'." They spent the morning in the ruins, treating wounds and taking stock. Mike had a broken hand he wasn't admitting to, and Donnie had a gash across his forearm that he was dressing himself with the focused competence of a man who had dressed his own wounds many times and developed opinions about medical tape. Sergio, remarkably, was uninjured and seemed mildly offended by this, as though the island had been rude. Les walked to the cliff. Norton's ship was still there under the tarp, functional from what he could tell. Better than anything they'd come in on. He pulled the tarp back and stood looking at it, and tried to feel something definitive about his brother that wasn't the angry, jagged, half-explained thing he'd been feeling for years. He didn't quite get there, but he stood in the morning light with the sound of the ocean below the cliff and the ship in front of him, and he let the grief exist alongside the anger without making a decision about which one was right. He thought about Quentin waiting at home, the laugh through the TV door. He thought about Sassy's voice in the vision. If you do good things will happen. Not because the universe was fair. He wasn't naive enough to believe that anymore, but because the alternative was to become the thing you'd been fighting. And he'd seen what that looked like. He'd watched it in Norton's face for 30 years, right up until the end. The island rumbled, deep and final. Under the jungle, something structural was collapsing. The slow surrender of root systems that had been holding things up for years. The tree line shifted in sections. In the distance, a sound like a great exhale. The island would sink, Clarence had said. Not fast, not dramatically, but the water table would rise through the compromised root channels, and the soil would give, and in a year or 5 years or 20, there would just be a reef here. Something flat and pale under shallow water, where a terrible thing had been. Les walked back to the others. "We taking the ship?" Donnie asked. "We're taking the ship. Norton wouldn't like that." "Norton isn't here," Les said. He looked at the group. Donnie with his bandaged arm, Sassy with someone else's blood on his sleeve, Mike nursing the hand he wasn't admitting to, Sergio already helping Clarence toward the ship, because he'd noticed the limp even though no one had said anything. "Load up. We're going home." They flew back low across the water in the late afternoon, the coast of Queensland, emerging from the haze in that slow way it had, the way it always looked like a promise and not quite a threat. The ship was quiet. Nobody talked much. Outside, the water below was perfect and flat and lit gold, and if you didn't know what was behind them, you might have thought it was beautiful. Mike fell asleep. Donnie smoked out the window. Sassy ate something from another bag he wouldn't identify. Clarence, sitting in the back corner with his arm in a makeshift sling Sergio had fashioned from a shirt, was writing something in a small notebook. Equations, diagrams, the disciplined scratch of a scientific mind that couldn't stop working even when it had just blown up its own work. Les watched the coast come closer. He thought about calling Quentin. He would call Quentin. He'd call from the harbor, and he'd say he was on his way, and that everything was fine, and it wouldn't be entirely true, but it would be more true than it had been in 4 years. There was something on the other side of this. Not clean, not simple, not the uncomplicated return that the movies always promised, but something. A version of the Tuesday evening that wasn't shadowed by what was coming. He could feel the shape of it, the way you feel the shape of a thing in the dark. When they landed at Brown Reach Harbor, it was nearly dark, and the lights of the town were coming on in ones and twos along the waterfront. A few people on the dock, the smell of salt and fish and something frying somewhere, normal. Defiantly, stubbornly, beautifully normal. Sassy climbed out first and stood on the dock and breathed it in. Then he looked at Les, and he didn't say anything, but the look said, "See, you came back." Les tied off the ship and stood on solid ground and let it hold him. He pulled out his phone. 1 bar. It would do. Quint answered on the second ring. "Dad?" "Yeah, mate. You all right?" "Yeah," Les said. And then because it was true, "Yeah, I'm all right." He could hear the TV in the background. He kept that sound in the specific pocket of himself, and he filled it all the way up. Then he walked up the dock into the lights of Brown Reach, with his crew beside him and the ocean behind him and the island. What remained of it, sinking slow in the dark, getting smaller with every step.